Hello everybody. This year we will be reading mainly from Matthew's Gospel. The Gospel of Matthew is reputed to have been written for a Palestinian audience. I want for a moment to deal with chapter 5 of Matthew's Gospel. It begins, of course, with the Beatitudes, the great charter, the great Magna Carta of Christians. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they who mourn. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven, etc. It's a great challenge to Christian people, saying how we should behave. It's followed in verses 30, I think it is, and following, in verses 20 and following, by a set of expectations that Jesus has of us. He says he has not come to destroy the law, but rather to fulfill it. And in that fulfilling of the law, Jesus gives some very clear examples of how we should believe. For instance, he says, you have heard how it was said to our ancestors, you shall not kill. And if anyone does kill, he must answer for it before the court. But I say to you, anyone who is angry with his brother will answer for it before the court. So he doesn't overturn the law, he refines it more. He explains the expectation he has. He explains how sin enters into our lives when we short-circuit God's will. We do the basics, we don't do any more. We follow the letter of the word of the law, but not the spirit of the law. There's another example. And it has also been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a writ of dismissal. But I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in the case of porneia, makes her an adulteress. And anyone who marries a divorced woman, he commits adultery. Here again, Jesus is clarifying what is the will of God, the will of his Father. He's demanding behavior that is demanding. That's the whole point. The demands of Jesus are indeed demanding. There is no such thing as cheap grace. There's no such thing as achieving Christian life without effort. One of my great heroes is a Lutheran theologian who was murdered by the Nazis in April 1945. His name was Dietrich von Bonhoeffer. One of his more famous works is called The Cost of Discipleship. Let me read for you what he says, because this to me is very important. This is the essence of the problem that we face in this generation, but in all generations. This is nothing new. It's where we Christians reduce the demands of Christ to the things we like doing. Bonhoeffer. In the world of declining religious affiliations, the church needs to show a missionary zeal that teaches the gospel faithfully. He says, cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate. Costly grace, on the other hand, he defines as the treasure hidden in the field. For the sake of it, a man will gladly go and sell everything he has. It is the pearl of greatest price, and with that for which the merchant will sell everything he has. It is the kingly rule of Christ, for whose sake a man will gladly pluck out the eye that causes him to stumble. Costly grace. The demands in Matthew 5 are for the seeking after costly grace, the seeking after virtue, but virtue that's not easy. We all of us, of course, fall way short on that, don't we? We all of us sin. St. Paul tells us that although I know what is right, I still don't do it. I know what's wrong, but I do that, even though I know it's wrong. It's a question about which there has been discussion since Adam was a boy. Why do we collude with injustice? Why do we not go the full measure and seek after costly grace? Why do we try to short-circuit the need to discipline ourselves? In this I'm very sinful. And I'm very sorry. I wish I could honestly say all of the time that I seek after costly grace, that I do the penance that I need to do, that I don't just take God for granted. Costly grace. That's why the sacrament of penance contains, or reconciliation rather, contains that element which we call penance. Penance is where we do things we don't want to do, which we would prefer not to do, a form of sacrifice. Sacrifice is not always pleasant. In fact, it's rarely pleasant. But sacrifice is a symbol, a sign, and an action by the Christian that I do indeed worship God with all of my heart, and that for His sake, and for the sake of my neighbour, I am willing to do something which I don't want to do. I don't just seek after grace without having to live as a Christian in a way that is difficult for me. I am prepared to sacrifice. That's what costly grace means. Fathers sacrifice for their children. The priest is supposed to sacrifice for his people. I seek after costly grace. In a way, when I seek costly grace, I imitate the actions of Christ, who took no account of His own suffering, but rather gave Himself for the salvation of all. Thank you.